In our previous video, we looked at ethical responsibilities of an organization, but we also see that organizations have a social responsibility. So we want to look at what we mean by corporate social responsibility. This is a firm's intention beyond its legal and economic obligations to do the right things and act in ways that are good for society. So we want to differentiate between social obligation and social responsiveness. Social obligation is the activities that a business engages in to meet its economic and legal responsibilities. Social responsiveness is the characteristics of a business that engages in social actions in response to some popular social need. So really, these are portions of what we call the CSR pyramid. And so if we go forward here, come back to that slide in a moment. But a management professor at the University of Georgia named Archie Carroll is the creator of Carroll's pyramid of CSR. So there's a corporate social responsibility pyramid that comes from Carroll. And what you can see at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of economic responsibility and legal responsibility. So these are the social obligations that we were just talking about. So at the very bottom level, in terms of corporate social responsibility, your organization needs to be profitable. That is, you operate the organization, you manage the people in a way that makes the organization continue to operate. This means that we will continue to provide goods and services to our customers and will continue to employ our employees. They'll get paid. So these are the economic responsibilities. There's an expectation, not even expectation, there's a requirement by society that an organization operate in a way that is profitable. And then on top of that, we have a requirement by society that the business operate in a way in which it abides by the laws and regulations that are set out for it. So those are the social obligations. Then we have social responsiveness. So this is the corporate social responsibility, the upper top of the pyramid. So this is going to be the fact that the business engages in social actions that respond to some popular social needs, social responsiveness. And it starts, you can see at that third level, it says ethical responsibilities. There's an expectation by society that our organization not harm others, that we do what is just and fair. So these are going to be the norms, not things that are codified into law. So the legal responsibilities are going to be those minimum ground rules. That's going to be the laws. That's the bare minimum we have to do. But the ethical responsibilities are going to be more of the norms set by society that are not in our laws. And then what you see at the top there is philanthropic responsibilities. So philanthropic responsibilities are the social activities that are not required for our business to be profitable. They are not mandated or required by law, and they're not even expected by society. So it's going above and beyond even the norms, what other people in the industry are doing. So if you think, for example, Tom's Shoes, every time they make a pair of shoes, they donate a pair of shoes to those in need. There's another company does the same thing with socks. That is not a requirement for them to operate and be profitable. That is not a legal requirement. They don't have to do it by law. And it's not even an expectation. Other shoe and sock producers don't do the same thing. So it is a philanthropic responsibility. And the philanthropic responsibilities are doing what is right for society. So the public does have a sense the business will give back, but going above and beyond that expectation, that's that philanthropic responsibility. Doing what is right for society because it's important to the organization, not just because it's a requirement or even an expectation. So let's just go back a bit here. So we were talking then about social obligations, that's the bottom two of the pyramid, and social responsiveness, that is the top two. So when it comes to approaches to how you deal with that pyramid in terms of how far you're willing to go up the pyramid, there are different approaches to CSR. How socially responsible is your organization? So you can have an organization that is obstructionist. That is, you don't value the social responsibility. So you may block attempts when others try to point out that you are not giving back to the community. So you lack that social responsibility entirely. Your focus really is on just the organization and how it is operating. You might take a more defensive approach. So this is the minimal commitment, doing just a little bit for the community. And this is where your organization, that profit drive, that motivation of profits is much more important than giving back to the community. That's the primary motivator. So really in that defensive approach, you're really doing just the minimum that's expected by law. So in terms of not polluting, for example, that is a requirement, legal requirements. So defensive approach, you are really just doing the minimum that's required by law. With the accommodative approach, there's a moderate commitment to social responsibility. So you've satisfied the legal requirements. So we're on that second level of the pyramid. And there is an attempt to meet the ethical standards that are set by society in terms of avoiding negative PR. So if we think about these approaches to CSR, the obstructionist, the defensive, the accommodative, they really align with the parts of the pyramid. So the obstructionist is really going to stick with just the economic responsibilities. The defensive approach is going to have the economic and legal. So we're doing the minimum required by law. The accommodating approach to corporate social responsibility is going to do economic, legal, and ethical. That is, they're going to attempt to meet some of those expectations set by industry, by the community, just to avoid that negative publicity. And those who have all four parts of the pyramid, economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic, are going to have more of a proactive approach. That is, they value that contribution to the community and so are willing to go above and beyond in order to give back to the greater community. So when Archie Carroll was developing the CSR pyramid, what he wanted to emphasize is that businesses need to perform in a manner consistent with the expectations of societal mores and ethical norms. That's that third level. And recognize that those ethical or moral norms come from the society that you're in. So if we talk back, or if we look back to the video when we talked about globalization, one of the challenges is that depending on what country that you're in, there's different cultural expectations in terms of what behavior is considered appropriate, right? Paying a bribe might be considered to be appropriate behavior in some cultures. And so we talked about that relativism of ethics. And so we can see here as well as we look at the pyramid in terms of what is seen as ethical or moral norms comes from the society. Okay. And so there's an importance here in being a good corporate citizen, doing what is expected morally and ethically, and then recognizing that there are companies that go even further beyond that to do more than what is expected by society. And then the other piece is that corporate social responsibility isn't just giving back to the community, but it is also compliance with laws and regulations, and it is ensuring that your organization is performing effectively. So when we look at corporate governance, the management has a responsibility in terms of ethics, and we have a responsibility in terms of that social responsibility. So we need to make sure that we have strategies, that we have sustainable finances, that we have accurate reporting, and a positive work environment. We also need to make sure that we are supporting ethical behavior by our organization and the people within it. So we talk separately about ethics and social responsibility, but they do intertwine a lot in terms of our corporate culture and the norms that are set for the organization. And it's important that the Governance of our organization prioritize and emphasize the expectations regarding both ethics and social responsibility. Alternative to looking at the pyramid would be to look at what is called the stakeholder model of responsibility. So we can look at corporate social responsibility by looking at the stakeholders. These are the individuals, the groups, the organizations that are directly affected by the practices and processes of the organization. So they therefore have a stake in its performance. This would include the customers who buy our product or our services, our employees, our investors, our suppliers, and the local community. So they are all impacted by how well our organization performs and what our organization does. So then there are different expectations in terms of what does it mean to be socially responsible, depending on which stakeholder you are. So for example, as a customer, you have a right to have the product that you purchase be safe, and for you to be informed about how the product works. So you have a right to be educated about what you're spending your money on and how it functions. You have a right to be heard. If you have concerns or complaints, you have a right to provide those to the organization, and you have a right to choose to buy a product from us or not, and a right to courteous service, right? Customer and service is important in dealing with our customers. So there are expectations in terms of how the customer is treated, the information the customer gets. These are all social responsibilities that are set forth. Then we have social responsibilities to the employee. We want to make sure that we have met our ethical responsibilities in terms of protecting mental health and physical health, and then social responsibilities in terms of ensuring that we're providing a sufficient wage, a living wage. Ethical responsibilities in terms of providing a safe and non-bullying workplace, having a place that's free from sexual harassment and discrimination, and then social responsibilities to our workers in terms of making sure that they have a balance in terms of their work life and their home life. So as an organization, our social responsibilities are to our customers, to our employees. We have social responsibilities to our investors. That is, we need to properly manage our financials, right? We need to make sure our organization is effectively run. That was the bottom level of the CSR pyramid. And then we're providing proper representation of our financial position. So these are legal requirements in terms of making sure those who are investors, stockholders, that they really know the truth, the facts about how well the business is performing. There's also laws against insider trading. So we want to make sure that we don't have conflicts in terms of how we're operating. We want to make sure that we're not moving money around to prop up an organization when that money isn't really there. So no check kiting. Check kiting is when you intentionally write a check for a value greater than the account balance. You're using the check to theoretically move the money from one account to the other. And then what you're doing is essentially using that to cover the fact that you don't have sufficient funds. And so you're spending it really as it's moving to cover up the fact that there's not enough funds in both accounts. So we have obligations to our investors in terms of properly managing our money and in terms of transparency. And then we have social responsibilities when it comes to our suppliers. We want to create a mutually beneficial partnership. We talked in our previous videos about the challenge when one member of the relationship has more dependence than the other, creates that leverage. And so you can be held hostage by your suppliers, or you can dominate them if you have leverage over them. So we talked about the importance of having that mutually beneficial partnership. We looked at one example in terms of the Toyota production system and how they'll choose suppliers and partners in their production process that they'll keep for 10, 15 years, move them onto their campus so they're nearby, they're involved in the design and the process design for a particular good, so highly involved and connected into the production process, and so have very clear transparency there. So they're well informed of what's happening, and we call that kiritsu, and that's that long-term alliance. We also want, as we work with our suppliers, to make sure that we're negotiating prices and delivery times that are acceptable to both parties. So again, that mutually beneficial relationship, one party isn't holding the other hostage. So as we look at our stakeholders, just quick, we looked at customer, we look at employee, we looked at investors, we can look at suppliers, and then last we can look at our local and international community. So how are we doing as an organization in terms of our social responsibilities to the people outside of our organization who aren't buying or selling from us? And so that would include things like pollution and not contributing too much to the landfill. Are we recycling? And then what are we doing in terms of giving back to the community? So are we involved in charitable donations or activities? And so we talked before about Tom's Shoes, giving shoes to needy individuals. There's an organization that does the same thing with socks. If we look at Tim Hortons, for example, with their Smile campaign to raise money, they have Tim Hortons camps for underprivileged children. And so here they're giving back to the local and international community. So corporate social responsibility is important. It has an impact on our organization, not just from a PR campaign, not just so that the future customers will buy from us because we are seen as giving back to the community, but it does have an impact on our employees when they are part of the philanthropic activities. So our employees are engaged in those charitable donations and activities. Our employees are engaged in that top part of the CSR pyramid, where we're doing things that are not required by society, not even expected by our industry, but we go above and beyond. And so there's actually a study. This study is from Moses and Josman. And what it did is it looked at 224 company employees, and they were randomly assigned into two groups, the volunteers and the non-volunteers. And what they found is that the group that volunteered, they had higher motivation. So being involved in corporate social responsibility was a great motivator for employees. And so what you're seeing here, this R, is a measure of correlation. So positive, they move in the same direction. So the more they volunteered, the more they felt motivated in their job. And they had higher job satisfaction. They liked working for their company more, and you can see that's quite highly correlated. So the more they volunteered, the more they liked the organization they worked for. And then the last one you see here says the more they volunteered, the higher the organizational identification. And on the chart that you can see above, you can see that the more motivated they felt, it also contributed to organizational identification. And the more job satisfaction they had, the more it lent to organizational identification. So we need to define, what is organizational identification? Well, this comes from Stuart, Albert, and David Whetton. Albert's from the University of Minnesota, Whetton's from Brigham Young, and they define organizational identity as a set of statements that an organization's members perceive to be central, distinctive, and enduring to their organization. So we talk about organizational identity. This is how people define the company they work for. What's the character of the company they work for? What's the competitive advantage? How do we tie the present organization to the organization's history? So when you think about companies that you frequent or that you've worked with, you have a perspective on who they are. That's the organizational identity. If we share that perspective on who they are, that becomes the organizational identity. So for example, if we look at the Hudson Bay Company and the fact that they've been operating since, what has it been, 1670, they're a long-standing institution. So we see them, right, as a pillar of the community that's been around for forever. tie that present organization to the organization's history. We talked about Tom's Shoes and how their brand, how they promote themselves is about giving back to their philanthropic contributions. And so that creates this organization's character. It's all about giving back and sharing with the community. So what we find is that organizations that are involved in corporate social responsibility, so the entire organization, all the employees, the more they are engaged in those philanthropic opportunities, the higher levels of the CSR pyramid, the more that they are going to identify with the organization, the more they are going to be satisfied in being a part of the organization, and the more motivated they're going to be. So it's that corporate social responsibility that creates that organizational identity for many organizations. So there are benefits to CSR. It creates brand recognition, right? So we see there are a number of brands that we, when we think of their philanthropic contributions, we think of that company. So it creates that brand. It increases sales because if you support what they're doing, you're more likely to buy from them. It creates that customer loyalty. It creates that positive business reputation. It can also create operational savings. So if we look at the lower levels of our CSR pyramid, then we are performing in ways that make sure the company is properly run. So better financial performance, better operational performance in terms of lower costs and savings. But we also find that because of the fact that CSR tends to lead to higher motivation in workers and higher job satisfaction, it also saves the company money because there's less turnover, workers stay longer, workers are more productive. And so it can have a financial impact on the organization as well. That adds to then a greater ability to attract talent, and as we said just a moment ago, retain the staff. So we lead to growth within the organization. As you build that reputation and you give back to the community, it also becomes easier to access capital. So more people are likely to invest with you. It's easier to get funding for future operations. So there are a number of benefits to having an organization that values corporate social responsibility, particularly those higher points on that pyramid.